Liquidate it. The entire portfolio. I don't care about the penalty clauses, Evelyn. Just burn it to the ground and have the ashes wired to my account by noon. Alistair Finch's voice was a low baritone, as smooth and cold as the smoked glass of his limousine's partition. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the grim, gray streets of the city's forgotten borough into a watercolor of urban decay. He was on the verge of closing a deal that would cannibalize his chief competitor, a victory so total it was almost poetic. His phone, a sliver of black technology, felt like a weapon in his hand. And Evelyn, he added, a final twist of the knife, make sure you send a case of their own champagne to their board of directors, a 1998 vintage. Let them toast to their own demise. A screech of tires cut through his satisfaction. The limousine lurched to a violent stop, throwing him against the supple leather of his seat. His driver, a man trained to be invisible, was suddenly very present, his panicked breaths fogging the partition. "What in God's name?" Alistair snapped, his eyes flashing with irritation. But his anger dissolved as he followed the driver's gaze. There, on the crumbling sidewalk, stood a building that looked like it had been weeping for a century, the St. Jude's Home for Children. And in front of it, a small girl, no older than 7, stood drenched and defiant in the downpour. A harpy of a woman with a face like a clenched fist was screaming at her, her words lost to the storm, but her venom perfectly clear. The girl didn't flinch. She just stared back, her chin held high, a tiny solitary island of defiance, in a sea of misery. Something in her posture, a familiar spark of unbroken will, snagged on a memory deep inside Alistair, a memory he had buried under billions of dollars and decades of ruthless ambition. The world narrowed to that one small face. The multi-billion-dollar deal, the champagne, the vanquished rival, it all turned to smoke. He raised the phone to his lips, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent that made his formidable assistant's blood run cold. "Evelyn, cancel the liquidation." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Sir, you heard me. And find out who owns that building. The Orphanage. St. Jude's." He never took his eyes off the girl. "I want you to buy it. I don't care what it costs. Just buy it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched, thick with unspoken questions and sheer, unadulterated shock. Evelyn Reed, a woman who had once negotiated the used-style takeover of a Japanese tech conglomerate using only a series of terse emails and a well-timed threat, was speechless. "Sir, a building? An orphanage?" The word sounded foreign in her mouth, like a term from an ancient, forgotten language. Alistair's world consisted of glass towers, stock tickers, and balance sheets. It did not contain orphanages. "Is there an echo on this line, Evelyn?" "Yes, an orphanage. That one. The one my car is currently parked in front of, in a neighborhood that looks like it was bombed and then forgotten. Get the details. I want the deed on my desk by morning." He clicked the phone off, severing the connection before she could muster another protest. The world outside the rain-streaked window was a tableau of despair. The woman, presumably the headmistress or a caregiver, finally seemed to run out of steam. She grabbed the little girl's arm, her fingers digging into the thin fabric of the child's soaked dress, and hauled her back towards the heavy oak doors of the building. The doors slammed shut with a finality that felt like a prison sentence. For a long moment, Alistair just sat there, the engine's soft hum the only sound. He was a man who operated on logic, on data, on the cold, hard calculus of profit and loss. What he had just done was the antithesis of his entire existence. It was an act of pure, unadulterated impulse, a multi-million-dollar whim sparked by the defiant gaze of a nameless child. He should have ordered his driver to move on. He should have called Evelyn back and told her it was a momentary lapse in judgment. He should have refocused on the corporate slaughter he had been orchestrating just moments before. He did none of those things. Instead, he found himself studying the building itself. St. Jude's. The name was ironic. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. The building was a monument to them. Its brickwork was stained with decades of pollution. Its windows were grimy, and a section of the slate roof was visibly sagging. A small, unkempt patch of grass out front served as a playground, featuring a single, rusted swing set. It was a place where hope came to die. And he, Alistair Finch, a man who traded in futures and commodities, had just bought it. The thought was so absurd, so utterly alien, that a strange sensation bubbled up in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't regret. It wasn't panic. It was curiosity. He leaned forward and tapped on the partition. "Get me everything you can find on this place," he told his driver, his voice regaining its usual commanding tone. "History, funding, board of directors, public records, everything." The driver, a former Special Forces operative who was rarely surprised, simply nodded. "Yes, sir." As the limousine finally pulled away from the curb, Alistair looked back one last time at the grim facade of St. Jude's. He had acquired countless companies, properties, and assets in his life. But as the orphanage disappeared from view, he had the unsettling feeling that this was the first time he had ever acquired a problem he had no idea how to solve. The following morning, the deed sat on his desk. It was a thick sheaf of papers, bound in a simple blue folder, looking utterly out of place on the vast, polished expanse of mahogany. His office was a testament to his life, a minimalist cathedral of glass and steel perched 50 stories above the city, offering a panoramic view of the world he had conquered. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, only a single, abstract sculpture that had cost more than most people's homes. It was a sterile, controlled environment, a fortress against the messiness of human emotion. The folder was an intruder. Evelyn stood before him, her posture rigid, her face a mask of professional neutrality that he knew barely concealed a storm of bewilderment. "The acquisition is complete, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice clipped. "St. Jude's Home for Children is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Finch Holdings. I had to create a new shell corporation under the philanthropic division, which, as you know, has been dormant for 12 years. He picked up the folder, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He had expected this to feel like any other transaction, a transfer of ownership, a line item on a ledger, but it didn't. This felt different, heavy. "The previous owners?" he asked, flipping through the legalese. "A board of trustees, mostly descendants of the original founder. They were eager to sell. The endowment ran dry years ago. They've been operating on fumes and city grants. The building is a designated historical landmark, which means it can't be torn down, but it's also a structural nightmare. It's riddled with code violations. Asbestos, lead paint, faulty wiring. A boiler that belongs in a museum of the Industrial Revolution." She paused, taking a breath. "Sir, with respect, what exactly do you intend to do with it?" It was the question he had been avoiding since the moment the words left his mouth. He looked out the window, at the sprawling city below. He could see the glittering towers of his competitors, the arteries of commerce, the relentless pulse of the world he dominated. He had a plan for everything. A 5-year plan for his company, a 10-year plan for his investment portfolio. He even had a plan for his own death, a meticulously crafted will that would distribute his fortune with the same detached precision he applied to his business dealings. But for a crumbling brick building full of lost children, he had no plan at all. "I'm going to visit it," he said, the words surprising him as much as they did Evelyn. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Visit it, sir?" "Yes, today. Clear my schedule." "But you have the quarterly earnings call with the board." "Reschedule it." "And the delegation from Shanghai is arriving at 3? Have them entertained. Buy them a sports team. I don't care. I'm going to St. Jude's." He stood up, a decisive movement that signaled the end of the conversation. He walked to the vast, floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. From this height, people were ants, insignificant. Their struggles, their joys, their messy lives were invisible. For years, that distance had been his shield. It had allowed him to make decisions that ruined lives and built empires without feeling a thing. But yesterday, in the rain, that distance had collapsed. A 7-year-old girl had looked at him, not at him directly, but her defiance had reached across the street, through the bulletproof glass, and had pierced the armor he had spent a lifetime building. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he had seen a flicker of himself in her eyes, a ghost of a boy who had once stood alone against a world that was cruel and indifferent, a boy he had thought was long dead and buried. He turned back to Evelyn. "And find out the name of the girl," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "The one with the dark hair, the one who was standing outside in the rain yesterday." The smell hit him first. It was a cloying mixture of boiled cabbage, industrial-strength disinfectant, and a faint, underlying scent of damp and decay. It was the smell of institutional poverty, a scent designed to scour away individuality and hope. Alistair Finch, a man accustomed to the custom-blended fragrance of his office and the crisp, clean air of his private jet, felt his stomach clench. He stood in the entrance hall of St. Jude's, a towering figure in a bespoke suit that cost more than the building's monthly operating budget. The opulence of his attire was so out of place it was almost violent. The floor was worn linoleum, cracked and yellowed with age. The walls were painted a shade of institutional green that seemed to absorb the light. A single bare bulb dangled from the high ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows. He had arrived unannounced. He wanted to see the place as it was, not as it would be presented for a wealthy benefactor. A woman was hurrying towards him, wiping her hands on a stained apron. She was thin and harried, with kind, tired eyes, and hair that was escaping its bun in wisps. She looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. Can I help you, sir?" she stammered. "I'm Alistair Finch," he said simply. The name hung in the air between them. Her eyes widened in recognition. The name was synonymous with wealth and power. It was the name on skyscrapers, on business journals, on the lips of politicians. It was not a name that belonged in the hallway of St. Jude's. The new owner," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm Clara. I'm a caregiver here." Before Alistair could respond, Another figure emerged from a nearby office. It was the woman from the day before, the one who had been screaming at the girl in the rain. Up close, she was even more formidable. She was a thick-set woman with a severe iron-gray bun and a mouth that was permanently set in a thin line of disapproval. Her name tag read, Mrs. Grimshaw, Director. She surveyed Alistair with cold, calculating eyes, her expression a mixture of suspicion and fawning deference. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice oozing a sickly sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "We weren't expecting you. What a pleasant surprise. Had we known, we would have prepared a proper welcome." "I prefer the improper version," Alistair replied, his tone flat. He looked past her, down the long, dim corridor. "I'm here for a tour." Mrs. Grimshaw's smile tightened. Of course. We are so very grateful for your investment. St. Jude's has a long and proud history of caring for the city's most vulnerable children. We run a tight ship here. Discipline, order, and piety are the cornerstones of our philosophy. Her tour was a carefully curated performance. She showed him the spotless, unused donor lounge. She pointed out the gleaming, industrial kitchen, conveniently ignoring the rust creeping up the legs of the steel tables. She led him to a classroom where children sat in perfect, silent rows, their eyes fixed on a blackboard, though the teacher was nowhere in sight. It was all a facade, a Potemkin village of care and order. Alistair saw through it instantly. He had built his empire on his ability to read people, to see the truth behind the carefully constructed lies on a balance sheet. This was no different. He saw the fear in the children's eyes. He saw the way they flinched when Mrs. Grimshaw's shadow fell over them. He saw the patches on their clothes, the worn-out soles of their shoes, the listless way they held themselves. This wasn't a home. It was a holding pen. "I want to see the dormitories," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence as she droned on about their weekly Bible study attendance record. A flicker of panic crossed her face. "They're being cleaned at the moment, Mr. Finch. Perhaps another time." "Now," he said. The single word was not a request. It was a command, delivered with the quiet, unshakable authority that had made grown men weep in boardrooms. Reluctantly, she led him up a creaking flight of stairs. The air grew colder, the smell of damp more pronounced. The girls' dormitory was a long, cavernous room, lined with 2 rows of iron-frame beds. The mattresses were thin, the blankets threadbare. There were no pictures on the walls, no toys on the floor, no sign of the vibrant, chaotic life of children. It was as sterile and impersonal as a barracks. And there, sitting on the edge of a bed near the far window, was the girl. She was folding a small pile of laundry, her movements precise and methodical. She looked up as they entered, and her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, met his. There was no fear in them, only a cool, appraising curiosity. "This is the dormitory," Mrs. Grimshaw said, her voice tight. "As you can see, everything is in its proper place. We teach the children the importance of tidiness and self-reliance." Alistair ignored her. He walked slowly down the aisle, his expensive leather shoes silent on the cold floor. He stopped in front of the girl's bed. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, her small hands resting on a neatly folded shirt. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Mrs. Grimshaw started to answer for her. "Her name is—" "I was speaking to her," Alistair said, his gaze never leaving the child's face. The girl hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to Mrs. Grimshaw and then back to him. A silent battle of wills was taking place. Then she lifted her chin, the same gesture of defiance he had seen in the rain. "My name is Lily," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And who are you?" The question was so direct, so devoid of the deference he was used to, that he was momentarily taken aback. Mrs. Grimshaw gasped, a sharp intake of breath. "Lily, you will show respect. This is Mr. Finch, our generous benefactor." Lily's eyes remained fixed on his. She didn't seem impressed. "He asked me a question. I'm asking him one back. It's called a conversation." A ghost of a smile touched Alistair's lips. It was a foreign sensation, like a muscle he hadn't used in decades. "She's right, Mrs. Grimshaw. It is a conversation." He looked back at Lily. "My name is Alistair, and to answer your unasked question, I'm the man who just bought your house." He watched for her reaction. He expected surprise, perhaps fear, or even hope. He got none of them. Her expression remained unchanged, her gaze unwavering. "You can't buy a house with people in it," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "That's not a house, it's a home, and you can't buy a home." Before he could respond, Mrs. Grimshaw intervened, her face mottled with fury and fear. "That's enough, Lily. To the laundry room. Now! You will spend the rest of the afternoon sorting the linens." Lily slid off the bed, her small frame rigid. She gave Alistair one last, long look, an unreadable expression in her gray eyes. Then she turned and walked out of the dormitory, her back straight, her footsteps silent. Alistair watched her go, a strange turmoil in his chest. He had come here to assess his latest acquisition, to treat it like any other asset. But Lily's words echoed in his mind. "You can't buy a home." He looked around the cold, sterile room, at the rows of empty beds. He looked at the fearful face of Mrs. Grimshaw. He looked at the peeling paint and the grimy windows. And for the first time in his life, Alistair Finch understood the difference between price and value. He had paid millions for the building, but he had acquired something worthless. Because she was right. This wasn't a home. And he, a man who could buy anything he desired, had absolutely no idea how to build one. The tour concluded with a visit to Mrs. Grimshaw's office, a room that was surprisingly well appointed compared to the rest of the building. It had a thick carpet, a large oak desk, and a small, but clearly expensive, oriental rug. The funds that didn't reach the children's dormitories seemed to have found a home here. She offered him a cup of tea from a delicate porcelain cup, a stark contrast to the chipped ceramic mugs he had glimpsed in the kitchen. He declined. He preferred to stand, a silent, imposing presence that seemed to shrink the room around her. He had seen enough. The carefully constructed facade had crumbled with every step he took, revealing the rot beneath. The fear in the children's eyes, the threadbare state of their belongings, the stark difference between this office and the rest of the building, it all painted a very clear picture. This wasn't just neglect. It was systematic deprivation. "Your records," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I want to see the financials for the last 5 years. Budgets, expenditures, donations, city grants, everything." Mrs. Grimshaw's teacup rattled in its saucer. "Of course, Mr. Finch. I'll have them prepared for you. It might take a day or two to gather everything." "I want them in 1 hour," he said. He walked over to her desk and picked up a small, framed photograph. It showed a group of smiling children standing with a local politician, all of them wearing brand new, brightly colored T-shirts. He recognized the photo from the orphanage's outdated fundraising brochure. A perfect piece of propaganda. I also want a list of all current staff, their qualifications, and their salaries, and a complete file on every child currently in your care. Medical history, family background, psychological evaluations, everything on my desk in 1 hour. He placed the photograph back on the desk with a soft, definitive click. The message was clear. Her reign was over. The panic in her eyes was now mixed with a bitter, simmering resentment. She had run this place as her own private fiefdom for years, unaccountable and unchallenged. Now this billionaire had appeared out of nowhere and was dismantling her world with a few quiet commands. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice taking on a whining, defensive tone, "I assure you, everything here is perfectly in order. We do the best we can with the limited resources we have. These children, they can be difficult, ungrateful. They require a firm hand." "A firm hand is one thing, Mrs. Grimshaw," Alistair said, turning to face her fully. His eyes were like chips of ice. "What I saw in the rain yesterday was not a firm hand. It was cruelty. You left a 7-year-old child standing in a storm because—" "Why? What was her crime?" The director sputtered, her face flushing. She was being insolent. She refused to eat her porridge. We cannot tolerate insubordination. It sets a bad example." "Her porridge," Alistair repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You punished a child for not eating porridge by exposing her to the elements." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "You're fired." The words fell into the silence of the room like stones. Mrs. Grimshaw stared at him, her mouth agape. You can't. I have a contract. The board." "I am the board," Alistair stated calmly. "I am the owner. I am the man who signs the checks. Your contract is terminated, effective immediately. A severance package will be wired to your account, contingent on you vacating these premises within the hour. If you are not gone by then, I will have you escorted out by security, and the severance will be rescinded. Do you understand?" She understood. The color drained from her face, replaced by a mask of pure hatred. This was a woman who had wielded absolute power over the powerless for years. The sudden total loss of that power was more than she could comprehend. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just waltz in here with your money and fix everything? These children are broken. They're damaged goods. You'll be begging me to come back within a week." "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Alistair said, his expression unreadable. "Now pack your things." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving her standing amidst the ruins of her small, cruel kingdom. He found Clara, the tired-looking caregiver, in the hallway, nervously polishing an already clean section of the handrail. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with apprehension. She had clearly overheard the confrontation. "Mr. Finch?" "Mrs. Grimshaw is no longer in my employ," he said, "until I can find a suitable replacement. You are in charge of the day-to-day operations." Clara looked as though he had just told her she was to be the next Queen of England. "Me? But I'm just a caregiver. I don't know how to run a place like this." "You know how to be kind," Alistair said. "That seems to be a qualification that has been sorely lacking around here. You will have my full support. Whatever you need, food, clothing, medical supplies, you will have it. Make a list. There will be no budget." He handed her a business card. It was made of thick black cardstock, with his name and private number embossed in silver. "This is my personal line. Call it for anything. I will have my assistant, Evelyn Reed, contact you to handle the logistics." He started to walk towards the exit, his work for the day seemingly done. He had cut the head off the snake. He had installed a competent, compassionate person in charge. He had allocated unlimited resources. By all business metrics, the problem should now be on its way to being solved. But as he reached the front door, he paused. He looked back down the long, dim hallway. Firing Grimshaw had been easy. It was a transaction, an exercise of power, something he was eminently familiar with. But it didn't solve the fundamental problem. It didn't fix the peeling paint or the leaky roof. It didn't erase the years of fear and neglect from the children's minds. And it didn't answer the question that echoed in his head, in the voice of a small, defiant girl. You can't buy a home. He had just unhomed a tyrant. He had just thrown money at a problem. But building a home? That was an entirely different kind of challenge. And as he stepped out of the oppressive gloom of St. Jude's and into the gray light of the city, he realized his work here had only just begun. The next few days were a blur of chaotic activity, orchestrated by Alistair, with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to a corporate merger. A fleet of vehicles descended upon St. Jude's, not black limousines, but white vans emblazoned with the logos of construction companies, catering services, and high-end department stores. The children, accustomed to a life of monotonous routine and deprivation, watched from the windows in stunned silence as their world was turned upside down. The first to arrive were the contractors. A team of architects and engineers swarmed the building, their laser measures and clipboards a stark contrast to the crumbling plaster. They condemned the entire electrical system on site, declared the plumbing a public health hazard, and discovered a patch of black mold in the basement that was so extensive one of the inspectors whistled in admiration. Alistair's instructions were simple. Fix it, all of it. I want this building to be the safest, warmest, most structurally sound building in the city, and I want it done yesterday. Next came the deliveries, trucks laden with new beds, mattresses, and brightly colored linens, boxes of clothes sorted by size from sturdy winter coats to soft pajamas, crates of new toys, books, and art supplies, enough to fill a dozen playrooms. The kitchen was restocked with fresh fruit, vegetables, and quality meat, replacing the endless supply of canned goods and powdered milk. Clara, overwhelmed but tearfully grateful, found herself signing invoices for sums that made her head spin. One afternoon, a renowned child psychologist, a woman Alistair had poached from a prestigious university with an offer she couldn't refuse, arrived to begin evaluating the children and the remaining staff. Alistair himself remained at a distance, managing the operation from his sterile office tower. He was in his element, moving pieces on a chessboard, allocating resources, issuing commands. It was a complex logistical problem, and he was a master of solving them. He had created a new budget for St. Jude's that was larger than the GDP of a small country. He had hired the best people money could buy. He had, in essence, thrown the full force of his financial empire at the problem. Yet, he felt a strange sense of dissatisfaction. He would receive daily reports from Evelyn, detailing the progress. "The rewiring is 30% complete, sir. The new kitchen appliances have been installed. Dr. Albright has begun her initial assessments. The children are, reportedly, enjoying the new food. It all felt sterile, abstract. He had changed the environment, but he hadn't connected with the inhabitants. The memory of Lily's clear, gray eyes still haunted him. He had her file on his desk. Lily Miller, age 7. Admitted to St. Jude's at age 3. Mother deceased, father unknown. The file was thin. A few pages of bureaucratic paperwork that summarized a small, tragic life. It listed her as intelligent, but prone to defiance and challenging authority. He read the line over and over. Prone to defiance. He knew what that meant. It meant she hadn't been broken yet. One evening, after a grueling day of meetings, he found himself pulling up the live security feed from the orphanage on his desktop computer. He had installed a state-of-the-art system, ostensibly for security, but in truth, he wanted to observe. He clicked through the cameras. The dormitory, now bright and cheerful, with new paint and bedding. The new playroom, filled with toys, where a few of the younger children were quietly playing. The dining hall, where the older children were eating a meal that didn't consist of gray mush. He found the camera for the small, walled garden at the back of the building. And there she was, Lily. She was alone, sitting on a newly installed bench, reading a book. A small, solitary figure in the fading light. He watched her for a long time. She was completely absorbed in the story, her face a study of concentration. He felt an inexplicable pull, a desire to be there, not as a remote benefactor watching on a screen, but as a person. It was an illogical, inefficient impulse. He had meetings tomorrow. He had a conference call with Tokyo in an hour. But he found himself standing up, grabbing his coat. "Evelyn," he said into his intercom, "cancel the Tokyo call." "Sir, it's the final negotiation for the microsystems merger. I'm aware. Something has come up. Handle it." He walked out of his office, leaving a stunned Evelyn in his wake for the second time in a week. He didn't take his limousine. He drove himself, taking one of the anonymous sedans from his private garage. The journey to St. Jude's felt different this time. He wasn't a conqueror, assessing a new territory. He felt uncertain. He parked down the street and entered through the back gate, using the key code he had memorized. The garden was quiet, filled with the scent of freshly turned earth from the new flower beds. Lily didn't hear him approach. He stood a few feet away, watching her. He could see the title of the book now. It was a worn copy of The Secret Garden. He cleared his throat softly. She looked up, startled. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, but she didn't look afraid. She simply closed the book, keeping her finger in place to mark her page. "You're back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," he replied, feeling strangely awkward. He, Alistair Finch, who could command a room of 1,000 people with a single sentence, felt tongue-tied in front of a 7-year-old. He gestured to the bench. "May I?" She shrugged, a gesture that was both a concession and a dismissal, and shifted over to make room. He sat down, the silence stretching between them, punctuated by the distant sounds of the city. "Good book?" he asked finally, gesturing to it. She nodded. "It's about a secret place, a place that's broken, but then someone comes and makes it beautiful again." Her words hung in the air. The parallel was so obvious, so potent, that he couldn't think of a response. "Do you like it here now?" he asked instead. "With all the new things?" "The beds are warm," she conceded, "and the food is better. David doesn't cry at night anymore because he's hungry." David, he recalled from the files, was a 4-year-old with severe asthma. But it's still not a home, she added, her gaze fixed on the high brick wall that surrounded the garden. It's just a prettier cage. A prettier cage. The phrase struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent millions, mobilized dozens of people, and all he had managed to create was a more comfortable prison. He had been approaching this like a business problem. Improve the infrastructure, upgrade the assets, and expect a better outcome. He had been fixing the building, but he had ignored the people inside it. What would make it a home? He asked, his voice genuine. He wasn't the billionaire CEO asking for data. He was just a man asking a child for an answer he didn't have. Lily thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. A home is a place where you're not afraid, she said slowly. It's a place where someone tucks you in at night. A place where you can be angry and someone still loves you. A place where you have a family. She said the word family as if it were a mythical creature, something she had only read about in books. Alistair looked at this small, fiercely intelligent girl, and he saw the profound depth of his own failure. He had provided comfort, but not safety. He had provided charity, but not love. He had given them everything money could buy, but he hadn't given them the one thing they truly needed. He had fixed the house, but he had no idea how to build a home. He sat with Lily in the garden until the sky was dark and the stars came out, listening as she told him, not about herself, but about the other children. About David's asthma and how he loved to draw robots. About Sarah, who was 10 and was terrified of thunderstorms. About Tom, the oldest at 14, who acted tough but secretly read poetry. For the first time, they weren't just files on his desk. They were names, faces, stories. And as he finally stood to leave, he looked down at Lily and made a silent promise. He didn't know how he was going to do it, but he was going to learn how to build them a home. Alistair began to change his approach. The remote command and control strategy was abandoned. He started visiting St. Jude's every day. At first, his presence was an anomaly, a disruption. The children would fall silent when he entered a room, watching the man in the impossibly expensive suit with a mixture of fear and fascination. The staff, still walking on eggshells, would hover nervously, unsure how to act around their enigmatic new boss. He was clumsy, awkward. He was a man who understood leverage and derivatives, but was completely baffled by the logic of children. He tried to solve their problems with money, a habit that was hard to break. When he found David, the 4-year-old, crying because he missed his mother, Alistair's first instinct was to offer him a toy. He summoned Evelyn, and within an hour, a van from the city's largest toy store arrived, laden with every conceivable plaything. David looked at the mountain of brightly colored plastic, his tears momentarily forgotten, but then he simply hugged his worn, one-eyed teddy bear tighter and asked for Clara. The lesson was not lost on Alistair. He tried to engage with them on their own terms, with often comical results. He attempted to join a game of tag in the garden, and, unused to such undignified physical exertion, promptly tripped over his own feet, landing in a heap on the newly laid turf. The children, after a moment of shocked silence, erupted in peals of laughter. It was the first time he had heard genuine, uninhibited joy in the building, and the sound was startling. He found himself smiling as he brushed the grass from his trousers. He sat with them in the new library he had built, attempting to read a bedtime story. His voice, accustomed to commanding boardrooms, was stiff and monotonous. The children fidgeted, their attention wandering. Lily, who had been watching from a corner, finally took the book from his hands. "You're doing it all wrong," she said, not unkindly. "You have to do the voices." She proceeded to read the story, her small voice transforming as she became a grumpy bear, a mischievous rabbit, and a wise old owl. The other children were mesmerized. Alistair watched her, humbled and amazed. She possessed a natural gift for connection that he, with all his power and intellect, completely lacked. He started to learn. He learned that Tom, the tough 14-year-old, wasn't reading poetry. He was writing it. Alistair found him a mentor, a retired professor who began visiting twice a week. He learned that Sarah's fear of thunderstorms was linked to a traumatic memory, and he ensured her therapy sessions with Dr. Albright were moved to the top of the priority list. He stopped trying to be a benefactor and started trying to be present. He would sit in the playroom, not talking, just watching them. He ate his meals with them in the dining hall, eschewing the gourmet food his chef usually prepared for him in favor of the simple, wholesome meals the new kitchen staff cooked. He learned their names, their fears, their small, secret dreams. The suit and tie were replaced with simple trousers and a cashmere sweater. The imposing aura of the billionaire CEO began to soften, replaced by a quiet, watchful presence. His biggest challenge and his greatest teacher remained Lily. She was his shadow, his critic, his conscience. She watched his every move with her intelligent, discerning eyes. She never fawned over him, never asked for anything. Instead, she challenged him. "Why are you here?" she asked him one day, as he helped her weed one of the new garden boxes. "You're a rich man. Rich men don't hang around places like this." "I own the place," he said simply. "It's my responsibility." "That's not an answer," she shot back, yanking a stubborn thistle from the soil. "You own lots of things. Do you go and have dinner with all of them?" He stopped and looked at her. She had an unnerving ability to cut through his defenses. "No," he admitted. "I don't." He hesitated, searching for an honest answer. "I came here because I saw you, in the rain. You reminded me of someone I used to be." It was the most he had revealed about himself to anyone in decades. Lily stopped weeding and looked at him, her expression serious. "Was he sad?" she asked. "He was alone," Alistair replied, his voice barely a whisper. "He was very alone." The transformation was not confined to St. Jude's. It began to ripple outwards into his business life. His executives at Finch Holdings were bewildered. Their ruthless, workaholic CEO was now leaving the office at 5 o'clock every day. He became less interested in hostile takeovers and more interested in the reports from Dr. Albright. During a tense negotiation over a multi-billion-dollar merger, he stunned everyone in the room by pausing the meeting to take a call. They expected it to be from a world leader or a rival CEO. They could hear the small, clear voice on the other end of the line. "Alistair, it's David. Clara said I could call. I drew a new robot. It has laser arms, and it can fly." Alistair's face softened. "That sounds incredible, David. Can you save it for me? I want to see it when I get there." He hung up and turned back to the stunned negotiators. "Now, where were we?" The deal, they found, was suddenly much easier to make. The hard, unyielding edge had gone from him. He was still a brilliant strategist, but now there was a hint of something else in his eyes, something that looked suspiciously like humanity. One evening, He was late arriving at the orphanage. A crisis at one of his European subsidiary companies had kept him on a series of conference calls. When he finally walked into St. Jude's, the building was quiet. Most of the children were already in bed. He walked up to the girls' dormitory, intending to just look in on them. The room was dark, save for a single nightlight. He walked silently down the aisle, his gaze falling on each sleeping child. He saw Sarah, curled up with a new stuffed animal, sleeping peacefully despite the rumble of a distant storm. He saw David in the boys' dorm across the hall, a drawing of a robot clutched in his hand. He came to Lily's bed. She was fast asleep, her book lying on the nightstand beside her. Her face, so often guarded and serious, was soft and peaceful in sleep. He felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, a fierce, protective instinct that was entirely new to him. He reached down and gently pulled the thin blanket up over her shoulder. His fingers brushed against her cheek. It was a simple, paternal gesture, the kind of thing he had never done in his life. At his touch, Lily stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, her gaze sleepy and unfocused. Then she did something that shattered the last of his defenses. She reached out her small hand and took his. Her fingers were warm, trusting. "You came," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "I was worried." And then she fell back asleep, her hand still holding his. Alistair stood there in the darkness for a long time, unable to move. A 7-year-old girl had been worried about him. Him, a man who had always been an island, who had never needed anyone. In that moment, he understood. This wasn't about responsibility anymore. It wasn't an acquisition or a project. These children, this place, they were becoming his life. Lily's words came back to him. A home is a place where someone tucks you in at night. He looked down at their joined hands. He was still a long way from understanding what it meant to be a father, or what it truly meant to build a family. But as he stood in the quiet darkness of the dormitory, he realized he had just taken the first step. He hadn't just tucked her in. In a way, she had tucked him in too. The news of Alistair Finch's strange new hobby began to spread through the city's elite circles. At first, it was a source of amusement, a bizarre eccentricity of a man who had everything. Business rivals whispered that he had lost his edge, that his sudden philanthropic turn was a sign of weakness. Tabloids ran speculative articles with headlines like "Billionaire Buys Orphanage," "Midlife Crisis," or "Messiah Complex." Alistair ignored it all. His world had shrunk and simultaneously expanded. The stock market tickers and corporate battles that had once consumed him now seemed distant and unimportant. His focus was on the small, complicated world within the walls of St. Jude's. He faced new challenges daily, problems that couldn't be solved with a wire transfer. He had to mediate a dispute between two 10-year-old boys over a stolen comic book, a negotiation far more delicate than any he had conducted over a corporate merger. He had to comfort a 6-year-old girl who woke up screaming from a nightmare, a task that left him feeling more helpless than any market crash. But with each small victory, he grew more confident. He discovered he had a surprising talent for assembling complex Lego creations, an activity that earned him the admiration of the younger children. He found that he could explain complicated math homework to the older ones in a way that made sense. He was no longer an awkward intruder. He was becoming a part of the fabric of their lives. He was simply Alistair. The physical transformation of the building was nearing completion. The scaffolding was coming down, revealing clean brickwork and new, energy-efficient windows. The sagging roof had been replaced. The garden was in full bloom, and a state-of-the-art playground had been installed where the single rusted swing set once stood. Inside, the drab green walls were gone, replaced by cheerful yellows and blues. The dormitories had been broken up into smaller, cozier rooms, each housing only 2 or 3 children. There was a new art studio, a music room with a donated piano, and a small movie theater with a popcorn machine. The change was so profound that Clara often found herself stopping in the hallway, tears in her eyes, unable to believe this was the same bleak institution she had worked in for 15 years. But Alistair knew that the real work, the most important renovation, was the one happening inside the children themselves. Under the care of Dr. Albright and a team of dedicated therapists, and with the newfound stability and warmth of their environment, they were beginning to heal. The haunted, guarded looks in their eyes were being replaced by curiosity and laughter. They were learning to trust again. They were learning to be children. However, a shadow from the past was about to fall over their new world. One afternoon, as Alistair was reading in the garden with Lily and David, a sleek black car pulled up to the front gate. A woman in a sharp business suit stepped out, followed by a man carrying a briefcase. Evelyn, who now spent half her time working from a makeshift office at St. Jude's, met them at the door. She came out to the garden a few minutes later, her face grim. "Alistair," she said, using his first name, something she only did in moments of crisis. "You need to see this. It's from the city, Child Protective Services." Alistair excused himself and went inside. In the foyer, the woman from CPS, a stern-faced bureaucrat named Ms. Davis, handed him an official-looking document. "Mr. Finch," she said, her tone cold and official, "we have received a formal complaint regarding your administration of this facility." "A complaint?" Alistair asked, his eyebrows knitting together. "On what grounds?" "The complaint, filed by a former employee, alleges that you are creating an environment of unstructured permissiveness, that you have circumvented established protocols for child welfare, and that you, as a single man with no formal training in child care, are an unsuitable guardian for these children. It further alleges that your past business practices demonstrate a character ill-suited to the nurturing of vulnerable minors." Alistair didn't need to ask who the former employee was. The venomous language had Mrs. Grimshaw's fingerprints all over it. She had made good on her threat. Unable to attack him directly, she was using the system against him, painting his kindness as incompetence and his generosity as a dangerous whim. "That's absurd," Alistair said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This facility has never been safer or healthier. The children are thriving." "That may be," Ms. Davis replied, unmoved. "However, the complaint is a serious one, and it has triggered a formal review. We will be conducting a full investigation, including interviews with the children and staff, and a thorough assessment of your suitability as the primary benefactor and de facto director of this home. A hearing has been scheduled for 2 weeks from today. A judge will determine the future of this facility and of the children within it." The implication was chillingly clear. If the judge ruled against him, the city could take over. The children could be scattered into the foster care system, and everything he had built could be destroyed. "The home," he had so painstakingly started to create could be torn apart by bureaucracy. For the first time in a long time, Alistair Finch felt a flicker of real fear. He had faced down corporate raiders, market collapses, and political enemies. But this was different. This wasn't about money or power. It was about his children. The thought came to him, unbidden and absolute. His children. The fight for St. Jude's was no longer a business proposition. It was personal. It was a fight for his family. He looked at Ms. Davis, his expression hardening into a familiar mask of steely resolve. "I see," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Then I suggest you conduct your investigation thoroughly. We will be ready for the hearing." As the CPS officials left, Alistair stood in the hallway, the official notice clenched in his fist. He could hear the sound of children laughing in the garden. It was a sound he had come to cherish, a sound that had been absent from this building for far too long. And he would be damned if he was going to let anyone, be it a bitter old woman or the entire city government, silence it. The battle for St. Jude's had just begun. The 2 weeks leading up to the hearing were the most stressful of Alistair's life. He mobilized his legal team, a pack of the most ruthless and expensive lawyers in the country. They were accustomed to arguing intellectual property rights and antitrust law, and were initially baffled by the intricacies of family court. But Alistair's instructions were clear. Win. I don't care how. While his lawyers prepared for the legal battle, Alistair prepared for the emotional one. The investigation began immediately. Social workers arrived at St. Jude's, their clipboards and neutral expressions creating a palpable sense of anxiety. They interviewed Clara, the other staff members, and most importantly, the children. Alistair was not allowed to be present during the interviews. He paced his office like a caged lion, waiting for news. He had to trust that the changes he had made, the relationships he had built, would speak for themselves. He worried most about the children. They had already been through so much trauma. Now they were being asked to speak to strangers about their lives, their feelings, their home. He was particularly worried about Lily. She was fiercely private and deeply mistrustful of authority. He feared she would retreat into a shell of defiance, that her words would be misinterpreted as insolence, just as they had been by Mrs. Grimshaw. The night before her scheduled interview, he found her sitting on her favorite bench in the garden. She was quiet, her small shoulders tense. "They're going to talk to me tomorrow," she said, not looking at him. "The people from the city." "I know," he said, sitting down beside her. He didn't tell her not to be afraid. He knew she was beyond that. "You just have to tell them the truth, Lily. Tell them what it's like here now." "What if they don't believe me?" she whispered, her voice small. "What if they take us away from here? What if they separate us?" It was the fear that haunted all of them, the fear of being uprooted again, of losing the fragile sense of family they had only just begun to build. He reached out and put his arm around her. She leaned into him, a rare moment of vulnerability. "I won't let that happen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, Lily, I will not let anyone take you away." The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was a cold, impersonal space, all dark wood and high ceilings. Alistair sat at one table with his legal team. At the other sat a city attorney and Ms. Davis from CPS. In the front row, a surprised spectator watched with a smug, vindictive smile on her face Mrs. Grimshaw. The judge, a woman named Annette Wallace, with a reputation for being tough but fair, entered, and the proceedings began. The city attorney presented their case first. They painted a picture of Alistair as a reckless amateur, a billionaire playing with the lives of children. They brought up his past, citing articles about his most ruthless business deals, portraying him as a cold-hearted predator who was temperamentally unfit to be a guardian. They called Mrs. Grimshaw to the stand. She was a masterful liar. She spoke in a soft, concerned voice, detailing how Alistair had undermined her authority, spoiled the children with lavish gifts instead of providing them with needed discipline, and fired dedicated staff members without cause. She twisted every positive change he had made into a negative, portraying the new, happy environment at St. Jude's as a chaotic and dangerous indulgence. Alistair listened, his hands clenched into fists under the table. His lawyers had prepared him for this, but hearing the lies spoken with such conviction was infuriating. When it was his turn to testify, he spoke calmly and factually. He detailed the conditions he had found at St. Jude's, the neglect, the fear. He explained the changes he had made, not just the physical ones, but the investments in therapy, education, and emotional support. He spoke of the children not as assets or charity cases, but as individuals with names, personalities, and potential. But he knew his words were not enough. He was a biased party. The judge's expression remained impassive. The turning point came when the city called their final witness, Dr. Albright, the child psychologist. They expected her to be a neutral professional, to perhaps validate some of their concerns about Alistair's unconventional methods. They were wrong. Dr. Albright was a formidable presence on the stand. She spoke with passion and authority about the profound transformation she had witnessed at St. Jude's. "When I first arrived," she said, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, "I found a group of children who were suffering from severe emotional trauma. They were withdrawn, anxious, and deeply mistrustful. They were surviving, but they were not living." She then detailed case by case the progress the children had made. She spoke of David's newfound confidence, of Sarah's diminishing anxiety, of Tom's flourishing creativity. "And this transformation," she concluded, looking directly at the judge, "is not due to the new toys or the fresh paint. It is due to the fact that for the first time in their lives, these children feel safe. They feel valued. They feel loved. And that is because of one person, Alistair Finch. He has done more for their well-being in 3 months than this city's entire system has done in their lifetimes." The city attorney's face fell, but the most powerful testimony was yet to come. Alistair's lawyer called their first and only witness. "We call Lily Miller to the stand." A hush fell over the courtroom as Lily, dressed in a simple new dress, walked to the witness stand. She looked impossibly small and fragile in the large wooden chair. Alistair's heart ached for her. He had not wanted to put her through this, but his lawyer had insisted. "The judge needs to hear it from them," she had said. The lawyer asked her simple questions. What was it like before Mr. Finch came? What was it like now? Lily answered in a clear, steady voice. She didn't cry. She didn't embellish. She just told the truth. "Before, we were hungry a lot," she said. "And we were cold. And we were scared. Mrs. Grimshaw yelled all the time. She called us names. She told us we were bad. And now?" the lawyer asked gently. Lily looked over at Alistair. Her gray eyes were full of a trust and affection that made his breath catch in his throat. "Now," she said, "we have enough to eat, and our beds are warm, but that's not what's important." She turned her gaze to the judge. "Now we have Alistair. He reads us stories, even though he's not very good at the voices. He helps Tom with his poems. He taught David how to build a castle out of blocks that doesn't fall down. He listens. He tucks us in at night." She paused, taking a small breath. "Mrs. Grimshaw said he was making us soft, but she's wrong. He's making us strong, because he makes us feel like we're a family." She looked at Alistair one last time, a small, brave smile on her face. "He's making it a home." Silence. The entire courtroom was silent. Even the city attorney seemed moved. Judge Wallace looked down at Lily for a long moment. Her usually stern face softened. Then she looked at Alistair, a new understanding in her eyes. She cleared her throat and rendered her verdict. "In the matter of St. Jude's Home for Children," she began, her voice ringing with authority, "this court finds that the accusations against Mr. Alistair Finch are not only without merit, but appear to be malicious in their intent. On the contrary, this court has heard compelling evidence of a remarkable and positive transformation at the facility." She looked directly at Alistair. "Mr. Finch, your methods may be unconventional, but the results speak for themselves. You have provided these children with more than just charity. You have provided them with a chance at a real life. The city should be thanking you, not persecuting you." She banged her gavel. "The complaint is dismissed. Full and sole custody of the children of St. Jude's and oversight of the facility is granted to Mr. Alistair Finch." A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees washed over Alistair. He had won. They had won. As the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration, he saw Mrs. Grimshaw slip out the back, her face a mask of defeat. But his attention was on Lily, who was running towards him. He knelt down, and she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He held her tight, the last of his defenses crumbling away. He was no longer just the man who had bought the building. He was the man who belonged in it. Life at St. Jude's settled into a new, happy rhythm. With the court case behind them, the cloud of uncertainty lifted, and a true sense of peace and stability descended upon the home. Alistair, now the legal guardian of 32 children, formally stepped back from the day-to-day running of his global empire, promoting a trusted deputy to CEO. He appointed Evelyn to a new, full-time position as executive director of the Finch Foundation, with its sole mission being the support and expansion of St. Jude's. His life was now dedicated to his new family. He was there for every scraped knee, every triumphant report card, every nightmare, and every birthday party. He discovered the simple joys he had never known as a child himself. Flying a kite on a windy day, roasting marshmallows over a bonfire in the garden, the simple pleasure of a shared meal filled with laughter. He was no longer the cold, detached billionaire. He was a father, a somewhat awkward, occasionally clumsy, but deeply devoted father. His relationship with Lily deepened into an unbreakable bond. She was his confidant, his advisor on all things child-related. They would spend hours in the garden, talking, reading, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. He saw in her a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart, and he made it his mission to ensure she had every opportunity to let them shine. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after he had first seen her standing in the rain, He found her on their bench, staring at the old brick wall. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about my name," she said. "Lily Miller. It's the name they gave me. But I don't know any Millers. It's just a name on a piece of paper." Alistair sat down beside her, his heart aching for the sense of rootlessness she had lived with her entire life. "A name is important," he said softly. "It's part of who you are." "I wish I had a different one," she said, looking up at him, her gray eyes serious. "I wish I had a family name." He knew, in that moment, what he had to do. It was a step he had been considering for months, a decision that had formed in his heart so gradually he hadn't even realized it was there until now. It was the final, most important piece of the home he was building. The next day, he took Lily on a trip. He didn't tell her where they were going. They drove out of the city to the quiet, dignified building that housed the family court. They met with a lawyer, and Alistair filled out a thick stack of paperwork. Finally, they were shown into a judge's chambers. It was Judge Wallace. She smiled warmly when she saw them. "Lily, Mr. Finch, it's good to see you both again, under much happier circumstances." Alistair knelt down in front of Lily, taking both of her small hands in his. "Lily," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "a long time ago, you told me that a home is a place where you have a family. And you were right. You and the other children have become my family. You've taught me how to laugh, how to care, how to love. You've given me a life I never knew I was missing." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't bother to wipe them away. "But there's one more thing I need to do to make this official, to make it forever." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It didn't contain a ring. It contained a simple silver locket. He opened it. Inside, on one side, was a tiny picture of him. The other side was empty. "Lily Miller," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to be Mr. Finch to you anymore. I want to be your father. I am asking if you would do me the incredible honor of becoming my daughter. I am asking if you would be Lily Finch." Lily stared at him, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. Tears began to stream down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. She looked at the locket, at the judge, and then back at Alistair. And then she threw her arms around his neck, holding on as if she would never let go. "Yes," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Yes, Daddy." Judge Wallace signed the adoption papers with a flourish, her own eyes suspiciously moist. As they walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand, Alistair felt a sense of peace and completion that all the billions in the world could never buy. He was no longer just Alistair Finch, the billionaire. He was Alistair Finch, the father. He had seen a girl being mistreated, and he had bought a building. But in the end, it was she, and all the children of St. Jude's, who had bought him. They had bought him a life, a purpose, a future. They had shown him the way home. As they drove back to St. Jude's, Lily opened the locket and looked at the empty space next to his picture. "We need a picture of me for this side," she said. Alistair smiled. "We do, and we need a bigger one, a family portrait, for the wall in the main hall." Lily leaned her head against his arm, a look of perfect contentment on her face. "Yes," she said, "a family portrait, for our home." And as the car turned onto the street that had once been so grim and forgotten, they saw it. St. Jude's. It was no longer a weeping monument to lost causes. It was bright and cheerful and alive. Lights shone from every window, and the sound of laughter drifted out from the open door. It was no longer just a building. It was a home, and it was waiting for them.